It was taken for granted that the industrialized West would maintain a competitive advantage in high technology industries, while the global South would remain in low-tech, labor-intensive, and primary goods industries. Today, disruptive, cutting-edge innovation can pop up anywhere in the world. The DeepSeek AI disruption and Kenya's revolutionary mobile money transfer technology are glaring signs of our times. Additionally, there is a saying that demography is destiny. Economic development cannot be divorced from demographics. It is people who produce, and it is people who consume or provide a market. The climate crisis is perhaps the most urgent and existential challenge of our time. Africa, despite contributing the least to global emissions, bear the greatest burden through floods, droughts, displacement, and food insecurity. We have scientific consensus that these extreme weather events are human-induced. But even if it were otherwise, decarbonization of the economy is progress in its own right. Conservation of nature and clean air are desirable ends in and of themselves. But 30 COP conferences later, national interests continue to stand in the way of global collective action, notwithstanding the fact that the atmosphere has no national boundaries. We continue, in my opinion, to play dice with nature. We envision a digital future that is Kenya in location, Africa in identity, and global in impact. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya and China are not merely trade partners. We are co-architects of a new world order, one that is fair, inclusive, and sustainable. Let us measure our success not in GDP growth or trade volumes, but in how many lives we uplift, how many futures we secure, and how much dignity we restore. This visit, as the first African state visit to China this year, mirrors my 2024 visit to the United States, the first African state visit there in 15 years. Perhaps, symbolically, Kenya can serve as a bridge between East and West, North and South, in an era of deepening geopolitical tensions. Let this be our shared legacy that China and Africa, through trust, vision, and partnership, helped build the foundation for a 21st century multilateralism that serves all humanity. Kenya has remained a non-aligned nation committed to peaceful resolution of conflict and sovereignty and mutual respect. We support the One China policy, a two-state solution in the Middle East, and dialogue, not escalation, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. As we say in Africa, when two bulls fight, the grass suffers. Let us choose understanding over confrontation. On the United Nations and the UN Security Council, no other circumstance other than the post-war situation would have made the current structure of the UN, and more particularly, the UN Security Council, and that is the 5 permanent members with individual powers, an acceptable peace and security architecture. The Security Council, once a beacon of peace and diplomacy, now has one permanent member invading one country, while another member takes sides in conflict, in direct contradiction to the Council's own resolutions. Yet today, the permanent members live in denial and resist reform, even as the Security Council becomes less and less legitimate and its relevance is being put to question. On the other hand, the global multilateral financial architecture is simply outdated. The Bretton Woods institutions recently celebrated their 80th anniversary. 80 years ago, we all know 2/3 of the world's nations did not exist as states when this architecture came into being. The IMF was established to buttress the gold standard, fixed exchange rate system, a system that collapsed 50 years ago. The World Bank, on the other hand, was established to rebuild Europe, an assignment now very well overtaken by events. This financial architecture that we have today presents 4 intertwined challenges. Number 1, the challenge of liquidity or financial safety net for the multiple and persistent climate and economic shocks that we face today. Secondly, inadequate finance for development and climate action. And number 3, cost of capital, what we are calling the great financial divide. And lastly, the problem of recurring debt crisis in developing countries, which is a consequence of the first 3. It is still easier to reform this financial architecture, even though the latter would be a better option. At the heart of the Bretton Woods institution is a fundamental issue. These are shareholder institutions. At the time they were formed, the shareholders were also the primary stakeholders and beneficiaries. Both the World Bank and IMF have evolved into development finance institutions, but the ownership and power remains with the wealthy countries that they no longer serve. The interests of the shareholders and stakeholders and beneficiaries are at great variance almost all the time. This anomaly became apparently glaring during the IMF SDR issuance, where 64% of allocations ended up in wealthy countries that did not need liquidity support. The poorest countries, which needed it most, received only 2.4%. That is the extent of disconnect between the shareholders' interests and the stakeholders and beneficiaries' interests. There are many reforms required of these institutions, but I believe that the most consequential is governance changes that will transform them into independent, apolitical global institutions, insulated from the national interest of their shareholders. And you know what? This requires no more than adopting modern corporate governance best practice. The shareholders should elect directors, and the directors should appoint and supervise competent professional management. Just as simple as that. I believe reform, not abandonment of multilateral system, is the path into the future. Education is a pillar of our diplomatic partnership. As Kenya, And as we deepen our focus on science, technology, and innovation, we welcome further partnerships with Chinese institutions, particularly in STEM fields, that is artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and the creative economy. Kenya's Silicon Savannah is established at Concert Technopolis, and our upcoming National Artificial Intelligence Strategy offers a unique platform for cutting-edge collaboration between Kenya and China.